Why was everyone laughing when she didn't laugh back? The desert heat pressed down on Fort Davidson like a held breath. Dust curled around boots and concrete. The range smelled of oil, metal, and old sun. 15 shooters moved through qualification drills with practiced noise, but the woman in the shade made no sound at all. She sat cross-legged beside an equipment shed, uniform faded, nameless, rankless, dismantling an M110 with the care of someone who knew the cost of mistakes. "So tell me," the voice cut through the air, amused and sharp, "what's your rank, sweetheart?" Laughter followed, crisp Navy uniforms. An Admiral's shadow stretched across her workspace. She didn't look up. Her hands kept moving, cloth against steel, steady, economical, as if noise didn't matter. Admiral Victor Kane leaned closer, a man accustomed to obedience, to rooms quieting when he entered. "I asked you a question." Still nothing. Someone joked she must be maintenance. Someone else bet she'd never fired past a pistol. The jokes stacked up easily. It's always easier when the target doesn't fight back. Only one man didn't laugh. Range Master Ellis stood near the tower watching the way she breathed. 4 in, hold, 4 out, again. The rhythm pulled something tight in his chest. He'd seen that breathing before, not on ranges, in places that never made reports. She finally set the bolt carrier down, carefully, like it mattered. "No rank to report, sir," she said calmly. "Just here to shoot." That earned more laughter. The word shoot hung in the air like a dare. "How far?" Kane asked, curiosity sharpening. 800 meters. That broke something loose. Someone slapped a knee. Another suggested spotting her so she didn't embarrass herself. Ellis felt his jaw tighten. 800 meters wasn't a joke distance. But she didn't explain, didn't defend herself. She stood smoothly, rifle already assembled, walked to lane 7 like the ground knew her steps. Ellis moved closer without meaning to. She settled behind the rifle, textbook posture, adjusted the rear bag by a fraction, adjusted scope parallax, windage, tiny movements, experienced movements. She breathed. On the 4th cycle she fired. The rifle spoke once, then again and again, 5 shots, 18 seconds, clean. Ellis didn't need the scope, but he looked anyway. 5 holes, 1 cluster, dead center. Silence swallowed the range. Brooks called it luck, wind, equipment, anything but what it was. Ellis felt something colder than pride settle in his bones. This wasn't luck. And whoever she wasn't here by accident. Why didn't she smile when she shattered their certainty? They checked the equipment, standard issue, no modifications, no tricks. She sat back, hands loose, expression empty, like someone who'd done this before, like someone who knew this wasn't the hard part. Admiral Kane watched her differently now, less amused, more calculating. "Where did you train?" "Various locations, sir." Brooks scoffed, called it arrogance, accused her of memorizing one range. Ellis tried to speak. Kane shut him down. A challenge followed, public, formal, tomorrow morning, new distance, new conditions, a chance to fail in front of witnesses. She paused only long enough to ask what conditions. Then nodded. Ellis watched her leave, something tight in his chest loosening into dread. When she passed him, she spoke softly. "Range Master." That was all. He called it in anyway, quietly, encrypted channel. The answer came fast. She was cleared. "Don't ask questions. Let her shoot." Ellis sat alone afterward, staring at a spent casing, knowing he just watched something classified breathe in daylight. That night Lieutenant Brooks couldn't sleep. He replayed the footage, 18 seconds, 800 meters, perfect. It didn't make sense. Because skill like that comes with history, and hers was invisible. Why did she hide when hiding cost her everything? Temporary quarters were quiet, institutional beige, no photos, no past. She rolled her sleeve up. The tattoo told the truth she never spoke. Crosshairs, a number, 847. Death Angel. Not decoration, documentation. Her laptop chimed, encrypted, brief. Kane took the bait, proceed to phase 2, reveal only when forced. Captain. A rank buried 3 years ago with a bombing that didn't kill her, just erased her. She remembered the basement, the questions, the pain, the decision to survive by becoming empty. She remembered walking barefoot through hostile territory, bleeding, silent, alive. They called her compromised, too dangerous to exist. So she became a ghost. Until the network stirred again. The same network that killed her father, the same one circling Admiral Kane now. She didn't want recognition. She wanted justice to finish breathing. Why did the test feel less like judgment and more like a warning? The qualification range buzzed with anticipation. Cameras, observers, skepticism. Brooks raised the distance. 1,000 meters. She didn't react. First shot 10. Second 10. 5 shots perfect. They changed lanes, added wind. Same result. 100 out of 100. No applause, just fear. When Brooks grabbed her arm, her sleeve slid back. The tattoo surfaced. The number froze him. Kane stared like memory punched through time. Ghost, he whispered. The woman dead for 3 years stood breathing in front of him. I'm Captain Vera Cross, she said evenly, and you're in danger. Names fell, truth followed, hostages, betrayal. Brooks broke. She didn't condemn him. She gave him a way back. Why did justice arrive without shouting? The warehouse fell quietly, non-lethal, precise. Her movements weren't angry. They were careful. The architect knelt, the family lived. The network cracked. When Brooks dropped to his knees afterward, Vera didn't bask in apology. She told him to stand. Because shame wasn't the point. Choice was. Admiral Kane saluted her with shaking hands. I'm sorry, he said. She accepted it not as victory, as closure. Why does dignity never ask to be seen? Months later the system worked, slowly, imperfectly, but it worked. Vera declined medals, took silence. A house, a sunrise, coffee. A drawer not fully closed. Because some missions don't end. They wait. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did silence follow her longer than the laughter ever did? The range emptied slowly like a room after bad news. Boots moved away. Voices returned, but softer now, uncertain. The jokes didn't land the same. They never do once confidence cracks. Lane 7 stayed behind, quiet, holding the shape of what had just happened. 5 brass casings still lay where they fell, catching the last copper light of afternoon like tiny accusations. She packed her rifle without ceremony. No hurry, no pride. Each piece went into its place with the calm patience of someone who had learned long ago that rushing only invited regret. Around her, men pretended not to stare. A few failed. Most didn't know what to do with her anymore. It's easy to mock someone you don't understand. It's harder when they refuse to explain themselves. Admiral Kane stood near the monitor longer than necessary. His hands were clasped behind his back, but his shoulders were tight. He'd seen exceptional shooters before, Olympic level, special operations, but this wasn't excellence polished for display. This was something else, something stripped down, purposeful, dangerous in its quiet. Tomorrow, he said at last, more to himself than anyone else. She heard him, of course she did, but she didn't turn around. Outside the range perimeter, the wind picked up, pushing dust across the asphalt in thin sheets. She walked through it without shielding her face. Dust didn't bother her. Pain didn't either. Both were just conditions to be accounted for. Behind her, Range Master Ellis lingered. He wanted to say something, ask something, anything. but instinct told him not to. You don't interrupt a storm just because you finally recognize the clouds. She passed him, slowed for half a step. "Range Master," she said quietly. That was all. 2 words, no explanation, no threat, just acknowledgement, and somehow that felt heavier than any warning. Ellis watched her disappear between buildings, then reached for his radio. His hand shook despite his effort to steady it. He hadn't felt this way since a valley in Afghanistan, where the air smelled wrong and nothing on the map matched the ground beneath his feet. He switched channels, encrypted off record. "I need a quiet check," he said. "Lane 7 today, female shooter." The response came faster than he liked. "She's cleared," the voice said, flat, final. "That's all you need to know." Ellis swallowed. "With respect, sir. Do not run her prints. Do not flag her presence. And if she shoots tomorrow, you let her shoot." The line went dead. Ellis stood alone with his thoughts, and the sinking certainty that Admiral Kane had just stepped into something far older and far deeper than an ego bruise on a firing range. Why did the ones who laughed feel smaller once they were alone? Lieutenant Brooks sat in his office long after sunset, the hum of fluorescent lights drilling into his skull. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't notice. He kept replaying the footage, frame by frame, watching the way the rifle barely moved, the way her cheek stayed welded to the stock, the way time seemed to slow around her. 18 seconds. He muttered it under his breath like a curse. He'd trained for years, missed birthdays, missed anniversaries, bled for every promotion, and some nameless woman had walked in off the dust and undone him without saying more than a dozen words. His roommate told him to let it go, said she got lucky. Brooks didn't answer, because luck doesn't breathe like that. Luck doesn't leave groups that tight. Luck doesn't look bored afterward. Something else gnawed at him, not just jealousy, fear, because skill like that doesn't come from competitions. It comes from places where mistakes don't mean a bad score. They mean bodies. He closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Maybe he'd crossed a line today. Maybe the jokes had gone too far. Or maybe he was just angry that she never once looked like she needed his approval. By the time he stood up, he'd already decided. He would dig, quietly, just enough to reassure himself that this wasn't what it felt like. Just enough to be sure. Why did she feel calmer preparing for judgment than she ever did waiting for praise? Temporary quarters were always the same, bare, forgettable, designed so no one stayed long enough to leave a mark. She preferred it that way. Objects had a way of anchoring you to versions of yourself you couldn't afford to revisit. She sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on knees, staring at her hands. Scar tissue mapped her knuckles like faded constellations. Each one had a name, a place, a decision that couldn't be undone. Tomorrow would be loud, public, controlled chaos, cameras, witnesses, pressure stacked deliberately to see who cracked. She exhaled slowly. Pressure didn't scare her, waiting did. She rolled her sleeve up, alone now, and let the tattoo breathe. The ink was sharp, unforgiving. Crosshairs centered over nothing, a number too large to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. 847. She didn't count them the way people imagined. There was no satisfaction in it, just memory, confirmation, proof that she'd done what she was ordered to do, even when it cost pieces she couldn't name. Some nights she wondered who she would have been if she hadn't survived, if the basement had broken her instead of emptying her, if she'd been allowed to stop being useful. Her laptop chimed softly, encrypted address, no sender name. She read the message once, then again. Kane is moving as predicted. Brooks is unstable. Ellis is cautious. Proceed. Reveal only if forced. She closed the laptop without replying. Being forced wasn't a risk. It was a plan. She lay back on the bed, hands folded behind her head, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slow and steady. The rhythm helped. 4 in, hold, 4 out, again. She thought about her father, about the way his voice sounded when he explained right and wrong like they were simple things, not negotiations, about how young she'd been when she learned the system didn't always protect the people it should. Tomorrow wasn't about proving she could shoot. That had been settled years ago. Tomorrow was about deciding whether the truth could survive daylight. Why did dawn feel less like a beginning and more like a reckoning? Before sleep finally took her, she imagined the range at first light. Concrete still cool. Flags hanging limp before the wind woke up. People arriving with expectations they didn't realize were already wrong. She wasn't anxious. She was resolved. There's a difference, and only people who have lost everything understand it. Anxiety asks, what if I fail? Resolve asks, what happens next? And tomorrow, no matter what they thought they were testing, she already knew the answer. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it shows up early, waits its turn, and lets the world reveal itself. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is exactly what they asked for. Why did the past surface only when the world finally went quiet? Night settled over Fort Davidson without ceremony. No dramatic sky, no warning, just a gradual cooling of concrete and steel as the base slipped into its routine hum. Generators droned. Distant laughter drifted from barracks. Somewhere a door slammed, sharp and ordinary. Life continued, unaware of how close it stood to a fault line. She lay awake longer than she intended to. Sleep had never been something she trusted. It came when it wanted, left when it pleased, and never asked permission before dragging memories along with it. Tonight was no different. Her body rested, but her mind stayed alert, cataloging, replaying, preparing. Eventually, she sat up. The room felt smaller in the dark. Cinderblock walls pressed inward, holding the faint echo of every place she'd slept since she stopped being allowed a home. Temporary quarters, safe houses, forward operating bases, rooms where the windows didn't open and the locks only worked from the outside. She rolled her sleeve up again. The tattoo caught the thin spill of moonlight from the window. The ink hadn't faded, military grade, permanent. It wasn't a symbol of pride, it was a ledger, a record no one else was allowed to read. 847. She traced the number once lightly, not to remember faces. She didn't keep faces. She remembered moments, the stillness before the shot, the way the world narrowed until nothing existed beyond breath and balance, the instant where choice vanished and action took over. People like to imagine snipers as cold, empty, but the truth was more complicated. You didn't do this job by turning off your humanity. You did it by putting it somewhere safe, somewhere deep, and trusting you'd be strong enough to carry it back out when it was over. Sometimes she wondered if she ever really had. Her laptop chimed again. She didn't jump, she never did. The message was brief, confirmations, timelines, a reminder of what tomorrow would expose if it went the way it needed to. At the bottom, a single line lingered longer than the rest. Be ready to be seen. She closed the screen slowly. Being seen was dangerous. Being known was worse. For 3 years she'd lived deliberately small. No social media, no patterns, no attachments. She worked jobs that required little interaction and less explanation. She learned to disappear in plain sight, a skill just as valuable as hitting a target at distance. Tomorrow threatened all of that. Tomorrow asked her to step back into a version of herself she'd buried, because keeping it alive had almost killed her. She lay back down and forced herself to breathe, 4 in, hold, 4 out, again. Eventually sleep came, not gentle, not kind. She dreamed of a kitchen that no longer existed. Morning light through a window, coffee brewing. Her father standing at the counter, sleeves rolled up, humming quietly as he read something on his tablet. He always hummed when he was thinking, never noticed he was doing it. In the dream, she was 13 again, barefoot, safe. "You're up early," he said without turning around. "I couldn't sleep," she answered, like it was still something he could fix. He smiled at that, turned, leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. He looked tired, but not the way she remembered at the end. This was a softer tired, the kind that came from caring too much, not being hunted. "Some things are worth losing sleep over," he said. "Just make sure you don't lose yourself with it." She wanted to ask him so many things, wanted to warn him, wanted to tell him what was coming. But dreams don't allow warnings. She woke before he could finish his sentence. Morning arrived early and indifferent. She dressed without looking at herself in the mirror, uniform pressed, movements precise, familiar. The ritual mattered. It reminded her she still existed in a body, not just memory. Outside, the air was cooler than the day before. Wind teased the flags downrange. Not enough to matter yet. That would change. She walked toward the qualification range alone. People noticed her now. Not openly, not obviously, but eyes followed. Conversations dipped. Yesterday's laughter had been replaced with curiosity sharpened by discomfort. No one joked today. Lieutenant Brooks stood near the range office, clipboard in hand, jaw set too tight. He hadn't slept either. She could see it in the way his eyes tracked everything, searching for control he didn't have. When he stopped her for inspection, she didn't argue. He checked everything twice. Serial numbers, trigger pull, scope mounts, regulation after regulation. Each one passed. His frustration grew with every confirmation. When he finally stepped aside, she lifted the rifle case without comment and moved on. That restraint cost her more than they knew. There was a time she would have corrected him, a time she would have challenged his assumptions. That version of her believed in institutions, believed if you did everything right, someone would notice. That woman died years ago. Range Master Ellis met her eyes briefly from across the concrete. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just held her gaze long enough to say what he couldn't out loud. "I know this isn't what they think it is." She gave him nothing in return, not because she didn't trust him. Because trust was a luxury she couldn't afford to spend. Why did the distance feel smaller the farther they pushed it? When Brooks announced the distance change, a ripple moved through the onlookers. 1,000 meters. Murmurs followed. People shifted, sensing spectacle. She didn't. Distance was math. Wind was math. Elevation, humidity, temperature, all variables with answers if you listened closely enough. She set up, checked her dope, adjusted, waited. The first shot broke clean. The monitor lit up with a 10. Brooks exhaled sharply. Someone whispered. She fired again. Another 10. By the fifth shot, the range felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. Perfect score. No celebration, no reaction, she simply reset. When they moved her lanes, stacking disadvantage on top of scrutiny, she followed without protest. This wasn't harassment. It was fear disguised as procedure. Fear always escalated. The wind at lane 5 was louder. Flags snapped. Dust danced sideways instead of rising. She accounted for it. 5 more shots, 5 more 10s. Something broke in the crowd then. Not loudly. Quiet fractures. The kind you only notice when things stop holding together the way they used to. Brooks dropped his clipboard. Admiral Kane stared at the screen like it had just spoken a language he recognized, but didn't want to remember. She stood rifle safe, waiting. She could feel it coming, the shift, the moment when disbelief turned into something sharper. People don't like being wrong about power. They especially don't like realizing they laughed at it. Why did the truth wait for touch? Brooks stepped too close. His voice shook when he accused her of fraud, of deception, of not belonging. She said nothing. When his hand closed around her arm, it wasn't violent. It was desperate, an attempt to force the world back into something he understood. Fabric slid. Ink met air. The range went silent. She didn't pull away at first. She let him see it. Let everyone see it. Because once it's seen, it can't be unseen. The number. The crosshairs. The name no one said out loud anymore. Death Angel. She felt the recognition ripple outward before she saw it. The way fear changes temperature. The way memory moves faster than logic. Kane's face drained of color. Brooks let go like he'd been burned. She rolled her sleeve back down slowly, deliberately. Control returned to her the moment his grip disappeared. "I'm Captain Vera Cross," she said, voice steady, "and you're running out of time." She didn't raise it, didn't need to. Sometimes the truth doesn't need volume. It only needs space to land. And in that moment, with 50 witnesses frozen around her, the past finally stepped fully into the present. Not to haunt her, to finish what it started. Why did everything feel heavier once no one was laughing anymore? The silence that followed her name wasn't empty. It was crowded. 50 people stood on the concrete range, but no one moved, as if motion itself might disturb something fragile and dangerous. Wind snapped the flags downrange, loud now, impatient, but even that sound felt distant. All attention narrowed to the woman standing at lane 5, rifle safe, sleeve rolled back down as if nothing extraordinary had just been exposed. Admiral Kane took a step forward, then stopped. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He had faced hostile fire, congressional hearings, loss at sea. None of it prepared him for the shock of recognition settling into place like a delayed explosion. "Ghost," he said quietly. The word slipped out before he could stop it. It carried weight, history, the kind of name spoken only in closed rooms and after action reports with entire paragraphs redacted. A name associated with impossible shots and missions that ended wars quietly without parades or headlines. She met his gaze without flinching. "Captain Vera Cross," she said evenly, louder this time. "Not for him alone, for everyone. Formerly attached to joint clandestine operations. I'm not here to embarrass you, sir. I'm here because you're in danger." The word danger finally broke the spell. Murmurs rippled outward. Someone swore under their breath. Someone else took a step back, instinctively creating distance from a story they never expected to stand inside. Lieutenant Brooks shook his head slowly, like denial might physically shake the truth loose. "This is insane," he said. "You expect us to believe." "I don't expect anything from you," she interrupted, calm, controlled. "But I do need you to listen." Kane raised a hand, silencing Brooks. His voice came out rougher than intended. "What kind of danger?" "The kind that doesn't miss," she replied. "The same network that killed my father, the same one that tried to erase me. They're moving again." The word father landed harder than her rank. Kane's face changed, subtly, the way it does when memory forces its way in. "David Cross," he said, not a question. She nodded once. People began connecting dots they didn't want connected. A brigadier general's death ruled accidental. An investigation quietly buried. A sniper officially declared killed in action 3 years later. Ellis felt his knees weaken and leaned against the console. He'd suspected something big. He hadn't suspected this. Brooks took a step back, then another. His hands trembled openly now. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're manipulating this. This is some kind of setup." She turned toward him fully for the first time. "Lieutenant," she said gently, and that terrified him more than anger ever could. "How long have they been threatening your family?" The color drained from his face. Kane's head snapped toward him. "What did she just say?" Brooks swallowed hard. "Nothing. She doesn't know what she's talking about." She didn't raise her voice, didn't rush. 6 weeks, she continued. Encrypted messages, first small requests, schedules, access logs, then photos, your wife leaving work, your kids at school. They told you to interfere with anyone who got too close to the Admiral. Yesterday, they told you to make sure I failed publicly. The clipboard slipped from Brooks's fingers and clattered against concrete. The sound echoed too loudly. Kane stared at him, disbelief hardening into something colder. Is this true? Brooks's knees buckled. He caught himself on the railing, breathing hard. They were going to kill them, he whispered. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, she said quietly. You just didn't see one that didn't cost you everything. The crowd had gone completely still now, phones forgotten in hands. No one spoke, no one moved. How do you know where they are? Brooks asked, voice breaking. Because I've been hunting them for 3 months, she replied. And because they made the mistake of using the same patterns they always do. She turned back to Kane. They have your movements, she said. They know you're scheduled to testify. They're planning to remove you before that happens, today. Kane felt the world tilt. He'd suspected resistance, pushback. He hadn't imagined a clock already counting down. What do you need? He asked. The question surprised even him, but it felt right the moment it left his mouth. Authorization, she said, and time. For what? To extract Lieutenant Brooks's family, she replied, and dismantle the node operating inside this base. Inside. Ellis felt a chill crawl up his spine. There's someone else, she added. High rank, trusted, they've been hiding in plain sight. Kane didn't hesitate. You have my authorization. Brooks looked up sharply. Sir. She saved my life once, Kane said without looking at him. I'm trusting her to do it again. She checked her watch. 43 minutes before they moved the hostages. Ellis was already moving. What do you need from me? Security footage, she replied. Industrial district, 3 months. Any unusual vehicle patterns? On it. She turned back to Brooks. You're coming with us. Fear flashed across his face. I can't. You can, she said firmly. And you will because they trust you, and because you owe your family that much. The crowd parted as she moved, purposeful now. No hesitation, no uncertainty. This was familiar ground. Crisis had always sharpened her. As they reached the parking area, Brooks stopped her. Why help me? He asked hoarsely. After everything I did. She paused, just long enough to answer honestly. Because they tried to turn you into something you're not, she said. And because saving innocence is the only thing that ever made this job worth doing. They drove fast. No sirens, no drama, just urgency. The industrial warehouse sat where she said it would, isolated, underestimated. The guards never saw them coming. She moved like memory, like instinct refined into certainty. Doors opened quietly, threats neutralized without spectacle. Inside, 3 figures huddled in a corner, Brooks's wife, his children alive. He broke then, dropped to his knees sobbing as they were freed. She didn't watch. She was already moving deeper. The woman in the back office looked up calmly when the door opened. Gray hair, crisp uniform, colonel's insignia. Recognition passed between them. So, the colonel said softly, Death Angel finally comes home. Vera raised her weapon, steady, unwavering. This ends today, she said. The colonel smiled thinly. You think this is the end? No, Vera replied. I think this is accountability. Outside, the sound of rotors filled the air. Inside, a network began to collapse. And for the first time in 16 years, Vera Cross felt the weight on her chest begin, just barely to lift. Because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't announce itself. It simply moves forward, unstoppable toward the truth. Why did the moment of victory feel quieter than the years of fear that came before it? The colonel didn't resist. That was the first thing Vera noticed as the cuffs locked around the woman's wrists. No sudden moves, no dramatic defiance, just a calm acceptance that felt almost rehearsed, as if this ending had been anticipated long ago. Outside, rotors thundered overhead, rattling the warehouse walls. Dust sifted from the rafters, drifting down like ash. The building smelled of oil and old secrets, a place designed to be forgotten, a place chosen by people who believed they would never be found. Vera lowered her weapon but didn't step back. "Who else?" she asked. The colonel's smile never reached her eyes. "You always did ask the wrong questions." Vera tilted her head slightly, a habit from long nights behind glass and steel. "No," she said. "I learned to ask the last one first." The colonel studied her then, really looked. The years had carved lines into Vera's face, but her eyes were the same, steady, unforgiving, the eyes of someone who had seen the cost and paid it anyway. "You think removing me changes anything," the colonel said. "This machine doesn't stop, it adapts." "Machines break," Vera replied. "People get tired." The colonel laughed softly. "You should know better, you're proof they don't." That one landed closer to home than Vera wanted to admit. Boots echoed behind her. Admiral Kane entered the warehouse, flanked by armed security. His presence filled the space, not with authority but with gravity. He took in the scene in silence. The restrained colonel, the freed hostages being escorted out, Brooks clutching his children like they might vanish if he let go. Kane's gaze settled on Vera. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded once. "This part's done." He glanced at the colonel, "And the rest?" "Won't be," Vera said. "Not if you keep your word." Kane's jaw tightened. "You have it." The colonel was escorted past Vera, their shoulders nearly brushing. The woman leaned in just enough to whisper. "You still think you're different," she murmured. "That you survived with something intact." Vera didn't turn. "I know what I lost." "And yet you keep fighting." Vera finally looked at her. "Because I know what happens if I don't." The colonel was led away, her footsteps fading into the noise of rotors and shouted commands. Another node severed, another illusion of control shattered. But Vera knew better than to call it over. Why did relief feel heavier than fear ever had? The med bay was too bright. Vera sat on the edge of the exam table, hands resting on her thighs, while a corpsman fussed over a shallow cut on her forearm. It hadn't even registered when it happened. Adrenaline had a way of editing pain out of the moment. "Hold still," the corpsman said gently. "I am," Vera replied. He smiled faintly, then grew serious. "You should have been dead," he said, almost to himself. She didn't answer. People said that to her a lot, usually with awe, sometimes with resentment, rarely with understanding. When he finished, he wrapped the bandage carefully, like he was afraid she might break. She almost laughed at that. Admiral Kane waited near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes distant. When the corpsman left, Kane stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. "For the record," he said, "none of this will be easy." Vera slid off the table and stood. "It never is." "They'll want testimony," Kane continued. "Public inquiries, names, dates." "I know." "And they'll want you," he added. "Your face, your story." That one gave her pause. She looked down at her hands, the scars, the faint tremor that never quite went away. "I didn't survive to become a symbol." Kane nodded slowly. "No, you survived to finish something." Silence settled between them, not awkward, heavy with shared understanding. "I should have protected your father," Kane said quietly. "I saw the signs, I ignored them." Vera met his eyes. The anger she'd carried for years stirred, then settled. "He knew the risks," she said. "So did I." "That doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed, "but it makes it real." Kane exhaled. "What happens now?" Vera considered the question. "I disappear again," she said, After debrief, after the dust settles. Kane frowned. You've earned more than that. She shook her head. This life doesn't end with medals. It ends when you choose to stop letting it take from you. And have you? He asked. She didn't answer right away. Why did forgiveness feel harder than pulling the trigger ever had? Brooks found her outside, near the edge of the base where the lights thinned and the night crept closer. His face was wrecked, red eyes, tear tracks, exhaustion etched deep. My family's safe, he said. They're flying them out tonight. She nodded. I need to say this, he continued. I'm sorry for yesterday, for everything. She studied him for a long moment, not with judgment, with assessment. They exploited your fear, she said. That doesn't absolve you, but it explains you. He swallowed. I'll accept whatever happens next. Good, she said. That's where accountability starts. He hesitated. How do you live with it, with what you've done? She looked out into the dark, where the fence line blurred into nothing. Some days, she said, you don't. You just wake up and decide not to let it own you today. He nodded, tears slipping free again. Thank you. She didn't say you're welcome. She didn't need to. But why did hope feel like the most dangerous emotion of all? The debrief lasted hours, questions layered on questions, analysts scribbled furiously. Lawyers watched every word. Vera answered what she could, deflected what she had to, protected names that still mattered. By the time it ended, dawn was threatening the horizon again. She stepped outside as the first light crept over the base, pale, uncertain, honest. She hadn't seen a sunrise without a scope in her hands in years. For a moment she just stood there, letting the light touch her face. Her comm device vibrated once. A single message. Extraction window open. Final choice is yours. She closed her eyes. For so long, survival had been automatic, reflexive, something she did because stopping felt like failure. But now there was space, silence, a chance to decide instead of react. She thought of her father's voice, of kitchens and mornings that smelled like coffee instead of cordite, of a life that didn't require constant vigilance. She opened her eyes. The sun rose fully. She typed a response. Stand by, not yet. She clipped the device back onto her belt and walked toward the horizon, unsure of where she was going, but certain, for the first time, that it would be on her terms. Because strength isn't just surviving the fight. Sometimes it's choosing what comes after. And that choice is the hardest mission of all. Why did the future feel more frightening than any battlefield she had ever crossed? The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night, and with it came a strange unease Vera hadn't felt in years. Not fear of being hunted, not fear of failing a mission. This was quieter, wider, the kind of uncertainty that couldn't be scoped or measured. She stood alone near the perimeter road, watching helicopters lift and vanish into the pale sky. Each one carried fragments of what had just happened, people, evidence, consequences. The machine was already grinding forward again, processing truth into reports and testimonies, reducing blood and breath into language that could be archived. She knew how this went. Soon there would be hearings, carefully worded apologies, faces on screens pretending shock at revelations they had quietly tolerated for years. Some careers would end, others would be protected. The system would call it reform and move on. And her. She would be inconvenient. Admiral Kane approached without announcing himself. He moved slower now, like a man who had finally accepted the weight of his own decisions. He stopped beside her, keeping his eyes forward. They're going to ask you to stay, he said. Consulting role, advisory, you know the pitch. She nodded, I do. You'd be protected, publicly acknowledged. Publicly owned, she corrected. He exhaled through his nose. Yes. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the horizon blur with heat. You were right, Kane said at last. About all of it, about the danger, about the cost of ignoring what's uncomfortable. Vera didn't respond. She learned that apologies mattered less than what people did after them. Kane turned toward her. If you walk away now, parts of this will stay buried. She met his gaze. If I stay, parts of me won't survive. That was the truth, clean, undeniable. He nodded slowly. I won't stop you. That means more than you know. As he walked away, Vera felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not closure, not relief. Permission. But why did walking away feel like stepping into fire instead of out of it? The debrief room was empty when she returned to collect her things. Her rifle case rested against the wall, scuffed and ordinary. To anyone else, it was equipment. To her, it was history, a companion, a burden. She ran her hand along the case once, then closed it gently. On the table lay a thin folder. No markings, no classification stamps, just her name typed neatly on the front. Inside were documents she hadn't expected to see assembled in one place. Mission summaries, commendations never issued, casualty reports with footnotes that told different stories if you knew how to read them. At the bottom was a photograph. Her father stood beside a younger version of Admiral Kane, both of them squinting into sunlight, both unaware of how the years would end. The photo was creased at the edges, handled often. On the back, a single line had been written in her father's handwriting. She deserves a life after this. Vera closed the folder and pressed it flat against the table, steadying herself. That was the hardest part of this work, not the killing, not the loss. It was the people who believed you could still be saved. But why did she feel most alone when the danger was finally gone? By afternoon, the base had begun to normalize itself. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then louder. Humans adapted quickly, even to truth. Vera walked through it like a ghost. No one stopped her. Some saluted, others looked away. A few stared openly, curiosity burning behind their eyes. She ignored it all. At the gate, Range Master Ellis waited. I figured you wouldn't say goodbye, he said. She almost smiled. Thank you, she said instead. For what? For seeing what this was before it was safe too. Ellis shifted uncomfortably. You ever need anything? She shook her head. I need less. He nodded, understanding more than she expected. As she passed through the gate, the weight she'd carried for years didn't disappear. But it shifted. Why did memory follow her, even when she changed direction? The road out of Fort Davidson stretched long and empty, cutting through dry land that looked like it had never known conflict. Vera drove with the windows down, letting wind replace the recycled air she'd breathed for too long. Her phone vibrated once. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, the voice on the other end was familiar, older, tired. You made your choice, the voice said. I did. Extraction teams will stand down. Good. A pause, then softer, you sure? Vera glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her past gaining ground behind her. I'm not sure of anything, she said, but I'm done being owned by this. Another pause. Then this is goodbye. For now. The line went dead. She kept driving. Why did the smallest moments feel the heaviest? She stopped hours later at a roadside diner that smelled like grease and coffee and normal life. The kind of place she used to avoid because normal hurt too much. A waitress handed her a menu with a tired smile. What can I get you, hun? The question caught her off guard. Not because it was complicated. Because no one had asked her what she wanted in a very long time. Coffee, Vera said finally, black. She sat alone in a booth watching sunlight creep across the table. The clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, a child laughing somewhere behind her. Her hands shook slightly when she lifted the cup. She didn't fight it. Healing, she'd learned, wasn't about erasing damage. It was about letting your body relearn safety. She took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter. She welcomed it. But why did survival feel incomplete without forgiveness? Later, as she drove again, she thought about Brooks, about the colonel, about her father, about herself. She didn't forgive easily. Forgiveness had always felt like surrender. But she was beginning to understand something else. Forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for the part of her still braced for impact, long after the threat had passed. She whispered a promise into the empty car, not to forget, never to forget, but to stop letting memory be a weapon turned inward. But why did the ending feel more like a beginning? As evening fell, Vera pulled off the road and stepped out, letting the sky stretch endlessly above her. No targets, no countdowns, just space. She rolled up her sleeve one last time and looked at the tattoo. 847. It would always be there. But it didn't define everything she was. She let the sleeve fall back into place and faced the horizon. Strength, she realized, wasn't what kept her standing under fire. It was what allowed her to walk away when the fighting was done. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition or applause. Sometimes dignity simply survives. And sometimes it chooses to live.